Hello, my name is Kai, and I am a bit of a rambler. I like to travel, learn, and tell stories. And I've got a story that I may have given bits and pieces of out already in other episodes, but I'm not sure I just told from start to finish. And like most of the countries I've been to, especially the backpacking ones, it's one of my favorite stories and episodes of my life. Hammock camping for the first time through Ireland. I was in a hostel or two in the beginning in Dublin, and I really liked that city. Very laid back, pretty multicultural, very walkable, best natural history museum I've ever been to. But as the wanderers say, my feet were getting itchy. I really wanted to get back out into the world. I had been hammock camping throughout Asia, in Thailand, and Vietnam, and Portugal, I remember. And for me, sleeping outside just feels better. It feels healthy. The air's fresh as can get because you're outside. It's pretty quiet and there are nature sounds. And while I had a lot of fun in the hostels and I loved seeing the live music and drinking Guinness and, meeting new people, after a while my brain was screaming at me to get out there. Because I had read that it's legal to publicly camp on any public land in Ireland, which is kind of rare among countries. Japan allows it. I think Portugal does allow it. Ireland allows it. And Ireland is so beautiful. Like, I was there in the winter and it was still super, super green. And despite it being cold and damp, I just had to get out into the wilderness. And Dublin is in the far north of the country. Well, northwards. Well, north-ish. Northeast. So I decided to start walking south. And I looked at the map, Dublin to Cork, and Cork's in the far south, and I clicked Route 2 using my offline maps, and it said I could walk down there, and so I decided to do that. The thing was, I had a few more days in the hostel I had already rented, and right after I looked, I think the same day that I found the feasibility of backpacking north to south across Ireland, I received a notification from Couchsurfing, which I had recently signed up for and pretty much never used. I never got any replies as a guy on it, but I knew girls on Airbnb who always got invitations for them to stay at their place, and I had put out a few dozen requests to stay for a few days and had never gotten a positive answer. So I usually stuck with hostels or Airbnb or Booking or something like that. But here it was, my first positive answer on Couchsurfing, and I figured, well, why not? I can live with this person, see what the Couchsurfing experience is like, and then if I want to, I can still go on that big hiking trip. And it was actually this girl from China who was studying at the University of Dublin, and I mentioned that I could speak Mandarin. So we started speaking, but it quickly became very apparent that her English far surpassed my Mandarin. And we met up in a pub to, meet each other and see the vibes. And we had a fun talk, and I bought her a Guinness. We had some snacks, and she asked about the rucksack and how I packed in travel, and I was explaining all of this. And we'd been hanging out for an hour or something. And then she asked me, "So where are you staying tonight?" And that was the first day I was supposed to be staying with her. I was supposed to be crashing on her couch. And we had sent messages where I said, "So I can stay with you?" And she replied, "Yes." But when she asked me here in the pub, "Where are you sleeping tonight?" and I told her, "Your place," kind of confused, she was like, "Oh, I don't know if I can have you over there." And I was like, "Oh, but this is the first day I was supposed to start couchsurfing at your place?" And she told me that she thought couchsurfing was a dating app. She didn't realize it was a way for travelers to crash on a couch, meet new people, and see the city for a few days. And so I explained what couchsurfing was, even though I was pretty unfamiliar with the app myself. I did at least have familiarity with the term. So I explained that, and she started looking so embarrassed and felt terrible. And I was like, "It's totally fine. Look, I already have my whole backpack. I was going to hike south to Cork anyway. I'll just start tonight. I don't want to impose on you because you didn't know what this was, I completely understand. It was really nice meeting you, and I'll start hiking south today, and then I can hammock camp like I was telling you about I've done in other countries. And if I'm back in Dublin, or you're in the south of Ireland visiting, or we're both in China, let's exchange WeChat information, and I'll talk to you, or you can send me a message. And she was still very apologetic, but was mollified, I think. And we did exchange information, and I did meet up with her in other parts of Ireland, and then in China as well, eventually. I happened to be in Beijing visiting again while she was visiting Beijing, and we hung out a few times, so it was great meeting a new person anyway. And also, now I had a pretty good reason to start my imagined proposed planned for tentative hike. Once I didn't have any place to stay that night, I was like, well, I guess you're definitely backpacking now. And that was great because I really wanted to get out there, and now there was no reason not to. So we left the pub. She went one way to get back to her university dorm, and I waved goodbye and walked the other way into a part of the city pretty far south that I hadn't been to before. That pub was about as far south as I had been before. And I just walked into a new part of the city, and then I just kept walking. And eventually the city buildings got less, and it was already, 10 p.m., whatever. And I walked for a couple hours. Then I was outside of Dublin. There were a few trees. I put in my hammock and passed out. And I hadn't made my rain tarp yet, which somehow hadn't been a real issue yet. The quick dry hammock that I used dried very quickly, so it could rain lightly for 20 minutes, and I wouldn't get wet because I made a Velcro seam on the top of the hammock so I could kind of close the hammock like a little cocoon, and all the rain would hit the fabric of the hammock itself, and the water would either shear off the fabric or evaporate very quickly because it was a quick dry material. Oh, you know what? I also had a tent until that point. And before I went to meet that girl at the pub, I gave them my tent, my hostel. I said, just give this to the next person who needs a tent. Because even when I was using a tent, in Italy was the last time I used it, almost every night I slept in my hammock instead because it's so much more comfortable than sleeping on the ground and so much more cleaner, and the setup is faster. The tent is fine, it's like fun, but it's just nowhere near as convenient as a hammock for me as hammock camping is. So yeah, this was my first time without the backup of a tent. I just had my hammock, and I was going to see what hammock camping was like. And while it is my favorite way to camp, since it was the first time, I didn't have the mosquito net yet. Wasn't a huge issue in winter in Ireland, not a lot of bugs. But I also didn't have my rain tarp yet, which was more of an issue because, as I mentioned, Ireland is damp and it rained a lot. I also didn't have the air foam mattress, the fourth part of the setup, which keeps me warm in sub-zero temperatures. And I think Ireland got sub-zero a few times, but I had a sleeping bag and I wore literally every layer of my clothes, and then I was warm enough while I was backpacking. And I don't even think I needed to wear all of my layers. I think I had a pretty good jacket at the time, and I was comfortable enough in the sleeping bag with the jacket. But every night was cold. It was cold. I like cold air and cold nights, but this was pretty freaking cold. And I decided to go on the Wicklow Way, which is the name of this small, I believe, dirt road that goes through the Wicklow Mountains. Now, you know what? It's really hard to imagine that being an unpaved road, since there were cars on it. It must have been paved. I think I'm conflating the sylvan setting, like forested mountain all around, with the road itself, which I believe was paved now that I'm thinking about it. Anyway, I was walking down the road. No, I was walking up the road because I was going up into the mountains before I descended on the other side, down into the south of Ireland. And having gotten rid of the tent and a few other traditional camping, quote, necessities, unquote, I was very lightened. And I just had this single backpack that I was hammock camping out of. And it was the lightest my rucksack had ever been. But I had added one item after getting rid of several larger items, which was the tin whistle. I think I had a battery at that point, but I did not have a quick charging phone, and I did not have a solar panel, which became crucial later on when I was hammock camping, or at least significantly convenient. I'll say it made things more convenient. And I also wasn't using any mobile data. I only had offline maps, and I just wasn't buying data at the time, which I've actually gone back to now, 10 years later. But anyway, all I had was this spare battery, so I knew that my phone wasn't going to last the whole way. It took like 2.5 days on my maps to walk from Dublin to Cork, or 5 days depending on how you went. But if I just walked straight, it would take about 55 hours of walking, and that's at a normal pace without a backpack on my back, and I'm not planning on walking 24 hours a day. The goal wasn't to reach Cork from Dublin. The goal was to hammock camp and have a fun time. So if I was hiking for 8 hours a day, or even 12 hours a day, it was still going to take me probably about a week to get to Cork from Dublin. And this was a good beginning journey because if there was an emergency, there were tons of towns along the way every hour or so. So it's not a big country. I wasn't going to get lost, but if I needed something, there was a town a couple hours away. And there's no dangerous animals in Ireland. It was a good spot. I decided to start hammock camping. But because my phone didn't have enough power to make any of the walk, I needed some non-electrical device to occupy my time when I was walking along for 8 hours at a time. And I decided on, again, the tin whistle, which, if you remember the plastic recorders they gave everyone in class in elementary school, a tin whistle is a smaller, thin copper version of that. It has a little green tip on the end, and the holes you're familiar with if you ever used a recorder, but it's made out of copper, very thin copper, rather than thick, ugly-looking plastic. It looks pretty cool, and it's a very traditional instrument in Ireland. I saw a show where a guy played it amazingly, and I thought, that's great. I can finally practice a musical instrument, which I've always wanted to do. Again, it's a good beginner instrument, just like Ireland was a good beginner backpacking, hammock camping country for me. And I think it might have been that same day before I met the Airbnb girl at the pub. I walked around the city and I saw a music shop, and right up front in the window, they had a bunch of instruments displayed, and there was a tin whistle. A coppery, brassy tin whistle with a little green whistle part on the front of it. And I went in, bought it for $5 with a little booklet that explained how to use the tin whistle. I think it explained what I was doing, and the store owner was like, "Oh, that's a long walk. Well, enjoy." So my pack was significantly lighter, and I felt like I was way more efficient than before, and I was. Imagine not having a tent and you're crammed into your rucksack after having one in there for months. It was a much more comfortable and efficient hiking experience. I was enjoying hiking more than I ever had just because of how light and small my rucksack now felt. But now I also had this non-electrical distraction, fun toy to play with on the way. And I did. And it was perfect for this time of year. It was very cold out, and there weren't a lot of other people hiking. In fact, I think I was the only backpacker I saw that whole hike, which I think lasted a couple weeks. But there's really no way to tell because my brain is broken for temporal logic. So without a vast reservoir of electricity, not knowing when I was going to charge up, when I was on this trail by myself, I pulled out the tin whistle and started practicing. I read the book cover to cover first. It was this little pamphlet that just explained how the notes worked and everything. And I had a really good time because the Wicklow Way is the first road I used to get out of Dublin. Directly southwest of Dublin, the Wicklow Way runs through the Wicklow Mountains, and it's just this one single road that goes through these, Lord of the Ringsian, foggy, misty, beautiful mountains. And here I was journeying my way through that. And it was right away in the beginning when I saw the Wicklow Mountains that I thought, oh, this trek is going to take me a couple weeks. There's no way I'm rushing through any part of this beautiful nature. I mean, there were rivers and streams and even deciduous trees in the winter time. And it was cold, so I didn't heat up uncomfortably even though I was backpacking. It was just a great hike. And then I had this musical instrument, and it was the first time I was really getting into any musical instrument and learning how to use it. And I think I started trying to learn the Hey Arnold theme song, like immediately, after I mastered the notes. But I was also working song through song because they had like 10 practice songs you could do. And I don't think I ever finished that book. I think my last one was Yankee Doodle Dandy. But I did, while I was walking on this first hammock camping trip, instead of playing on my phone, I was practicing the tin whistle. And the first time I used it, I was like, oh, that's too loud for living. But then there was no one around me. I was on a mountain. I was in Ireland. It just felt so appropriate to play the tin whistle in this environment that I did. And that became a very satisfying hobby for several years. My first real musical instrument that I dedicated myself to with any regularity. Oh, that might have been the second, because I did take up the violin very briefly, but it was right before I left China, and I didn't take the violin with me when I started backpacking. No, the violin was a few years later after I left China the second time. This was the 9 months I spent traveling in between the first and second stints teaching English in China. So yeah, the tin whistle was the first instrument I ever learned. The tin whistle I practiced a lot more because I had it with me when I was going on this solo venture, and I didn't have my phone to play with or anything. So while I never met another long-term backpacker along the Wicklow Way and then along any of the roads I walked south to get down to, I didn't quite make it to Cork. I made it to Waterford, and the story ends very well. But I never saw another long-term traveler. I did see a few day backpackers just out for the day, and I think only right in the beginning, though, on the Wicklow Way in the Wicklow Mountains, because I remember 2 there. It was the second day of hiking after leaving Dublin, and I was coming up to a bend in the road. There were a bunch of switchbacks going up to the highest elevation of the Wicklow Mountains. And on one of the switchbacks, there's a small wall of earth and then a forest going back, but the forest was, 4 feet higher than the road that I was walking on. And I noticed that at the farthest point of this raised switchback hedge of earth along the road, there was a figure. And I was still a couple hundred yards away getting up there, but I kept walking and I realized it was an older lady, maybe middle-aged something, attempting to step down from the earthen ledge down to the main road. But wherever they had gone up must have been lower down because she was having trouble stepping down off the ledge. And Irish people in general are less outgoing than Americans. And she glanced up briefly and saw me, but then looked back down and kept gauging the depth and seeing if she could step off safely. And I was wondering if I should or should not talk to her because I knew how private Irish people were, and I didn't know if she would want my help. But here was someone who clearly needed some sort of small assistance, and I could offer that. And then if she didn't want it, okay. But why not offer the assistance? So I finally came within normal speaking distance, and I just asked if she needed any help. And immediately, knee-jerk reflexively, it seemed to me, she said, no, I don't need any help. Thank you very much. No. But it took me, a few minutes to walk up that road, and she hadn't made any progress getting off this ledge. And to the left and right, it just seemed like it went on very high up. And, that ledge raised above the road. It didn't seem like it was easier in the near distance. And I just told her, well, you can just push down on my hand and then step down, and you should be able to get down okay. And I'll just hold my hand here. And she looked a little embarrassed or flustered, but said, yes, okay, thank you, if you don't mind, I'm so sorry. And she put her hand on mine, and with that leverage was able to safely step down that big, maybe it was 3 feet, because she did just step down, so like a meter high. But she stepped down safely and got on the ground, just as a car pulled around the corner and stopped next to us, and a man about her age got out. I inferred it was her partner or husband. And he got out of the car, saw me, looked at his wife, and he said, "You managed to get down?" And his wife answered, "Yes, this young man helped me." And the old man said something like, "There are still good people in this world," and nodded and smiled at me from under his rider's cap. And they both had those lilting Irish accents. And me, in my stupid American accent, was like, "Okay, nice, so good to help you people, okay, bye." And I kept walking, and they drove off down the hill, and I kept walking up that mountain. But I was almost near the top at that point, and I could continue really into the Wicklow Way when the forests closed around the road fairly briefly. It's a small country, so there's just one big mountain, and then I was coming down off the mountain. I think I did sleep up there the first night. Oh, you know what? I didn't have to wait till dusk because, like, 2 switchbacks later, I came upon this car by the side of the road, and I was wondering what was going on. And then when I was walking past it, there was a lady, another like middle-aged, older than the first lady for sure. Maybe she was like, I don't know, 60. And she was loading logs into the trunk of her car. And I was like, okay, this is like a quest. Like, this is like I should definitely offer help here. And I did. And she said, "Yeah, if you want to. It looks like you're carrying enough already," something like that, because of my rucksack. And I just helped her load all the logs into her car. And she was very active and healthy. She seemed like she could do it herself, but it was enough logs to fill her entire trunk. And it would just obviously go way faster if someone helped her do it. So I helped her load everything up into the car. And when we were finished, we had small talk, and then she asked me if I was Christian or Catholic or something, and I said no, I'm agnostic or atheist. I don't believe in any particular deity. And she said, "I don't think it matters too much. As long as you do good deeds and you live a good life, I think that's the most important thing," even though I'm a devout Catholic or whatever she said. And it was really cool seeing someone from an older generation say something so tolerant. I was worried when I told her the truth that I was an atheist, that she was going to be like, "All right, well, have fun in hell," slam her door and like drive off. But she was very gracious and nice, and yeah, just had a good little talk. And she thanked me and drove off with her firewood. And it was a great day because I got to help 2 people without really going out of my way. It was just convenient things that I was perfectly capable of doing that didn't take a very long time on the road I was hiking down anyway. And it feels so good to help people. It just feels great to help people. So that was a very satisfying afternoon. And then that night I slept on the mountain. And I'm not sure if this was the same night, but we can maybe assume it is. I found a stand of trees as I was just leaving the Wicklow Mountain top, kind of. And I put in my hammock between 2 trees, and it was cloudy overhead and seemed like it was going to rain. But like I said, I had had the quick dry hammock in a few countries where it had rained. It had been okay because it really does dry so fast. Decathlon hammock. And the hammock was so comfortable that I got in and I fell asleep. And then I woke up and I didn't know what woke me up because I was on top of a mountain that, like, those 2 old ladies and that one husband were pretty much the only people I had seen all day. And it was winter, so there just was not a lot of traffic, pedestrian or otherwise, on the road. And I looked around me like, what the heck woke me up? No bugs biting me. And I looked to my left and I saw a monster head floating in front of me. And I was like, "Oh!" And then I realized that it was a horse. And I hadn't noticed the fence that I had set up my hammock next to. So I put it up between 2 trees, but there's a bunch of trees and it was pretty thick, so maybe 10 feet away, maximum, I'd guess, there was a fence and a horse looming its head over the top post of the fence, staring obviously directly at me. And I was reminded of that pony episode from Adventure Time, or the Hark a Vagrant pony, just staring with its big dumb eyes. And I was like, hey there, horse. Okay, I'm gonna go back to bed. And then I noticed there were 3 or 4 other horses behind it, like maybe 10 meters back each one, but they were all similarly behind that horse, all staring out of the fence at me. And I was like, all right, whatever, I'm going back to bed. And I fell asleep. But I don't think I had my mosquito net at this point, and I know I didn't have my rain tarp at this point in my travels because it started raining, and I thought, oh, well, maybe it'll just dry and it'll be okay. And then it kept raining. And I was like, well, as long as it doesn't keep raining for another 20 minutes, it'll dry pretty quickly. And my wet clothes will bleed water into the quick dry fabric of the hammock, and then I'll dry that way. It's fine. And then the rain started getting through the hammock material into my sleeping bag. And I was like, well, as long as the sleeping bag doesn't get completely soaked, I'll be okay. And then I rustled or turned around to get a better position and fall back asleep. And I just heard squish, squish. And I was like, okay, sleeping bag is soaked. This hammock is soaked. My rucksack, luckily it's waterproof, but it's soaked, the top of it, the cover of everything. I have to get out of the rain because now it's been raining for, I don't know, an hour, a couple hours, and there's no sign of it letting up. And it's winter in Ireland, and it's near freezing. And all of my clothes and my warmest possessions, like my sleeping bag, are soaked through. If I don't move, this is actually dangerous. So I packed everything up. I didn't put my sleeping bag in my backpack. I just wore my wet clothes because I was like, well, what do I do about this? I can't hang them out to dry. And it continued to rain. It wasn't pouring. It was just consistently raining. But as I stepped out of the forest back onto the Wicklow Road that I had been hiking on, a huge gust of wind hit me, and the wind didn't stop either. The wind just kept blowing, and while there was still rain, the wind was blowing so hard that it felt like it would dry my stuff, even if I was still getting lightly rained on. I feel like the wind would dry the moisture out of all my stuff faster than the rain would continue to make it wet. And now it's I didn't get a lot of sleep. I think I went to bed after midnight, and that was 3:30 a.m., something like that, and I had just been getting rained on. So I was pretty tired and exhausted, but I was like, well, here, this is the perfect opportunity to dry out all of this stuff that I was too stubborn to find shelter for in the first place. And so I walked down the middle of this Wicklow Road, down off the mountain, with the wind slamming into the front of my body, holding first my hammock in front of me, and it literally dried in a few minutes. It was very fast. I just held it out, spread out in front of me, and it was soaked through. But the wind was so crazy strong that after, let's say 5 minutes maximum, the hammock was almost completely dry except for the ropes at either end of it, but the fabric was all dry. And I was like, well, okay, great. And I packed that up and put it away. And then I held my sleeping bag in front of me and just let the wind buffet that as well. And I probably walked with it for 30 minutes or something, I'll guess. But the sleeping bag actually dried out that way also. Just me walking down the road, holding out the sleeping bag spread out and letting the wind push all the moisture out of the fabric and the stuffing. It was really impressive and just perfectly timed, just coincidentally beneficial. So I repacked my sleeping bag after making sure I squeezed all parts of it, and I couldn't believe how dry it was, but it was dry. Oh, and the rain did lighten by the end of that, walking down the road drying fabrics process. And I held out all the fabric after there was almost no rain. There was still just a sprinkling. But yeah, everything dried out really well. Packed everything back in, kept walking down the road. And after an hour, it was just a stretch of road, and I didn't see any public lands or trees I could set up my hammock again. And I had already walked 45 minutes away from the trees next to the horses I had set up the first time. But finally, I found a small copse of trees to the right, and I was exhausted at that point. I was like, okay, falling asleep. And I set up the hammock, and then just went to bed. And I woke up later. Since it was winter, the sun wasn't rising very early, so it might have been 8:30 or 9:30, I'm not really sure. But I remember it was late morning, and I woke up from a sound, and I looked over, and the copse of trees that I was in were actually just the trees in front of someone's house. I didn't even notice the house when I put up my hammock. I'm guessing because I was so tired. But I felt infinitely better after waking up 4 or 6 hours later, however long it was. And I watched a normal businessman carrying a briefcase walk out of his front door through a few trees. And the sky was lightening still, but it wasn't fully bright. And he didn't glance at his front yard. And I was sort of surrounded. And if he had looked, he probably would have been able to see me fairly easily, but all the conditions were just right. Like, my hammock is a blue-green, so it kind of blends in with the trees, especially darker in Ireland because it's gray, so green looks a little blue. And the trees are kind of bushy, and I was blocked by the trees. 75% of the hammock, I would say, was like blocked by the trees. And he was focused on getting to work, so I just watched him walk down the front steps of his porch, get into his car, back out of the driveway, and drive away. And he didn't notice me hammock camping in his front yard, basically. I'm pretty sure it was his front yard. And I let myself just relax for 15 minutes and kind of wake up because, yeah, I felt way better, but I was about as tired as I had ever been the night before. And I knew that I had a week or two more of this kind of backpacking ahead of me, and I just had to marshal my spirits to get out of the hammock. But I did because I didn't want to camp in someone's front yard all day, especially when it, got bright out. But the hammock was 100% dry by then. I checked the sleeping bag again. It still felt completely dry from the night before. So I really lucked out, considering if it had just kept raining, or if it hadn't been a windstorm right after that weird rain, everything would have been sopping wet, and I might have had to go somewhere to dry things out. But as it was, everything was good. I packed up everything, hefted my rucksack, and kept on my way. And that was the point I realized I was backpacking through Ireland. This should be fun. And the next town I got to, there was a pub right on the corner. And I was like, yeah, of course. I'm backpacking through Ireland. I need the extra calories. And I went into the pub, and it may have been 11 a.m. or whatever, 1 p.m., who knows? I certainly don't. But it was still pretty early in the day, and there was a couple regulars and one bartender behind the bar. And I think I put my hat, because I was wearing this beanie, on a radiator, and then asked for a Guinness and a packet of cheese and onion crisps, because I wanted something to munch on with my beer. And he poured the pint of Guinness, gave it to me, gave me the crisps, and it was like manna from heaven. It was so delicious. I was heaven sent. It was blissful snackage. It took me maybe 15 minutes to finish the beer and I'll call them crisps while I'm telling the Ireland story instead of potato chips, but that's what crisps are. So it would have taken me 15 minutes. I think I was like nursing it, so maybe it was 20, 25 minutes. But by the time I finished the pint of Guinness and the crisps, I felt restored nutritionally, and my hat was dry on the radiator. So I pulled on the beanie, thanked the guy a lot. They asked me while I was drinking the Guinness what I was doing and where I was going, and I told them just walking. And they're like, it's nice. Okay. Irish people don't talk a lot in their pubs, which I appreciate. And there's no music playing. It's just a bunch of people enjoying beer together in a nice spot, which is definitely the type of bar I prefer, a public house. And I felt warmed up, thanked everybody, paid for my pint of Guinness and cheese and onion crisps, and went on my way. And then I was like, that should be what I do every time I get to a new town, because I'm carrying a rucksack. I'm going to be walking a huge portion of the day, maybe not the majority, but I'm going to be using a lot more calories than usual. And Guinness tastes delicious. Those crisps are delicious. I should just get that every time I enter a new town. And that's what I started doing. There were 3 like bigger-ish roads, and they were all going the same way down toward Cork, which was my tentative eventual destination. And so I just walked along whichever one was convenient. And every time I came upon a new town, of course, one of the first things I would see would be a pub on the corner nearest the road. And I walked in, dried off my hat and gloves sometimes if they were wet, because it was sprinkling all the time. And my rucksack is waterproof. I felt okay, but when I got sprinkled on and it was that cold, it was nice to go in, dry off, and I would get my ceremonial, traditional, nourishing pint of Guinness and a packet of cheese and onion crisps, take a break for maybe half an hour, and then tell everybody again the exact same way. There was always 2 or 3 regulars and 1 bartender, and they all asked what I was doing, and I would tell them and be like, oh, that's great. Well, good luck on your travels. And I would heft everything up and go on my way again. And it was very pleasant. They would all tell me something about their town, or I would learn this little factoid that was interesting. But it was really a lot more like existing in the culture. I was just existing with these people in their natural habitat. And I wasn't imposing because I was traveling. I was on my way somewhere, so they didn't feel the need to be too hospitable. And Irish people were incredibly hospitable while I was there. But I didn't feel like I was a burden. I was, buying a beer and chips from the establishment. And nobody felt inclined to start a huge conversation because I would be gone in half an hour anyway. But I had nice little conversations with people. Or sometimes I had no conversation, just had a pint of Guinness and a packet of crisps, and that was immensely satisfying as well. And then I continued on my way. And that's basically how the next few days went. I had maybe 3 or 4 Guinnesses each day as I kept walking, and I never got very drunk at all. I was just maybe a low buzz if there was another town 30 minutes away from the one I just left. And that definitely happened a lot. It's a small, pretty densely populated country, or at least the town centers are pretty close together because of how small the country is. And I really enjoyed my walk. I had a very fun time getting that beer, having those snacks, talking to the natives, and walking across a country, which is quite manageable to do in Ireland. On maybe the 4th or 5th day of the trek, though, I stopped in, it was nighttime, maybe 8:30, and so I stopped in this one bar that was kind of hopping, and I was surprised because there was nothing. There was a town 10 minutes before, and I didn't really see a close-by pub, so I just kept walking. I figured the next town would have one. But after another 10 minutes of walking, on the side of the road, there was just a pub in the middle of nowhere on the side of the road, in the middle of these 2 rural towns. And when I walked in, there were easily like 25, 30 people, and all of them looked up at me and then just looked back at their drinks, and everybody continued. And it was the first time I had seen that many Irish people in a pub at pub rush hour or whatever was going on. I think it was just the only pub in the area between these 2 rural towns, and that's where everyone hung out in the evenings. So I went up, and I ended up talking to this girl next to me who I think invited me to stay at her place, but she was with her boyfriend, and I was like, I'm not going to do that. Also, she was drunk, so I was like, I don't even know if this is an okay proposition. Like, if she's really just offering me a place to stay for the night until moving on, or how comfortable her partner would be. But I talked to a few of the patrons, and everyone's interested to hear about a traveler and what you're doing and where you've been. And you're going to Cork? He's walking to Cork, she announced to everyone. And everyone was like, oh, all right. And then went back to their beers. I really like that about pubs in Ireland. Whatever happens, they're like, yeah, okay. And then they all turn back to their beers or their conversations. It's a very conclavey sort of community feel, social feel, which I like much more than screaming music and a sports game and you can't talk to each other like in most bars around the world. I miss pubs. And I started talking to the bartender, and we traded some information. He's born and raised in one of those towns. It's his bar. He's lived and worked there his whole life. He asked me questions. I told him about teaching English in China and traveling to a few countries. And he said, well, do you have protection from the sun out there? And I was like, yeah, kind of. No, not really. And he held out this hat and he's like, that thing will protect you. And I looked at the yellow baseball cap and I was like, yeah, that looks like a pretty good cap. Well, it'll protect you. I was like, okay, good. I should probably get a baseball cap. And the lady next to me was like, he's offering you the cap. You can have it. It's a gift. I was like, oh, really? And the man was like, yeah, if you need it, you can have it. And he like crossed his arms and looked away. And it was just so Irish and in a great way. And I was like, well, thank you so much. It really felt like, you know, a token gift along, like Lord of the Ringsian gift along the journey's path. And I was so grateful for it. And I did wear it the first day. And then I lost it or something, which is, I don't lose many things. Regardless of how I keep reminding people I have no idea how time or I don't keep track of time at all. I don't lose things very often, and I just have one rucksack, so it's pretty easy for me to keep track of all my possessions, and something happened to that yellow cap after a few days. It also wasn't as comfortable as the beanie I had, so I think I only wore it the first day, but I did eventually lose it somehow, and I've always felt really bad about that. But that was a cool situation, very gracious of that guy to just give me his hat to protect the weary traveler on the road. I think I had 2 or 3 beers because the atmosphere was a lot more lively with everybody packed in there, and it was a generally younger crowd. Like I said, usually it was mostly regulars at the other pubs, and it was earlier in the day, so there was just 2 or 3 other people maximum. And this had like 30 to 40-year-olds, and then the gruff 60-year-old bartender who gifted me that cap. So I enjoyed my pub siesta for a couple hours and declined a couple hospitable invitations to stay at their room because it wasn't just I didn't know these people. They're all pretty friendly. I would have probably felt comfortable taking a spare bedroom or a couch in their house. This was more, I was loving living outside, even with the rain episode, even with being startled and woken up by a horse and helping people load their cars with firewood. I was loving living outside. It was so comfortable, so easy to do, just it felt right. Hammock camping. And I had backpacked with a tent a couple times, but this hammock camping, I was like, oh man, this is how I live. This is my modus operandi for sure. I had to figure out the rain thing, and you know, if it's not winter, the bugs are going to be a problem, but this is great. Breathing fresh air, sleeping in the fresh air, suspended in the fresh air. I loved it, and Ireland is all green, so it smells fantastic. All green or mostly small towns. That's the last big thing I can remember before the conclusion. I decided to stop hammock camping near the south of the country. It's definitely along the southern coast, Waterford. It was a day's hike from Cork, but I had spent time in Dublin, and while Cork I was interested in, when I made it to Waterford, for some reason I was like, I think I should stay here. I think this should be the end of this first hammock camping journey. And it was the right choice because I went along the main road of Waterford, and there was a bar selling stuffed baked mushrooms with blue cheese dressing. And my dad used to make stuffed mushrooms, and I never really liked them growing up, but that was when I was a child. And I had eaten so many varieties and types of food that I never would have even considered growing up by this point that I was like, I'd probably deal with stuffed mushrooms at this point. And I went into what would become the last hammock camping pub stop of this journey, almost. And I got those mushrooms, and they were delicious. They were really great. I mean, as satisfying a meal as one could have. I was so happy with it. I think I also got a Guinness, beef and Guinness pie, which is like a small pie with beef, like beef stew and a shepherd's pie with Guinness broth, gravy, whatever, as the substrate. Am I explaining that appetizingly? And it was such a great little feast at the end of the hammock camping. But I still wanted to hammock camp. I just knew that I was going to do it somewhere else next. I just had it in my mind. I was like, okay, that was amazing. I'm going to keep doing this in other countries. I'm going to digest this experience and reflect on it and let my soul assimilate the splendor of hammock camping. And I walked around the town the rest of the day, and then I happened upon this one bar, and again, I just followed my gut. I had this feeling. I was like, that's the bar I should spend this night in. And I think I bought a hostel there, dropped off my rucksack, and then I went for this walk and found this last bar. And I walked in, and it was like 2 for 1, and I started drinking Guinness, slowly, just relaxingly, like you do in an Irish pub. And I made it until the evening, and this group of, 12 women came in, and everyone knew who they were and were cheering. And I was like, well, this will be interesting. And I had already been chatting with a couple regulars there, and it was just a very welcoming experience overall. But then when this team came in, the sun had set, and once they came in and everyone recognized them, like the party had started. And they all got beers. And it turns out that was the Scottish ladies rugby team. And I don't know if it's the regional team or the national team. I have no idea. But they told me all these stories about rugby. And I was like, that sounds way cooler than American football. And they were all total badasses. And they started drinking and singing karaoke. The night got late enough that the bartender locked the doors, because Irish pubs still do this. They do a lock-in. So you're not allowed to drink after hours, but if the door's locked, the police aren't going to bust in through the door because it's private property, and you can just they'll keep serving you. And apparently I had been at the bar long enough, and I believe her Siobhan, spelled Siobhan, Siobhan, the Gaelic way to spell it, or Irish way to spell it. Siobhan sort of vouched for me, and she was like, oh, he's good. And I had talked to a couple members of the rugby team, and they were like, yeah, he can stay. And they just let me stay in this lock-in with the Scottish ladies rugby team and all these people. And that turned into a whole night of not debauchery, just drunken, furious joy is a good way to say it. They're rugby players, so they play hard. And they played super hard this evening. And I'm surprised at how long this hammock camping Wicklow Way story has ended up. So I think I'm going to do a separate Irish story, because I haven't talked about the step dancing and this rugby team story. A bunch of stuff happened that night. So that'll take a while to explain. Oh, I haven't talked about the Waterford Crystal Factory. Yeah, you know what? We'll go on to Irish too, and I'll just tell a general Irish tale of all the stuff that didn't fit into the specific hammock camping story. But man, the Wicklow Way, what a shining beacon of cultural experience that turned out to be. And it's absolutely shaped my life. There's not a day I sleep indoors that I'm not like, this is nice. But you know what's better? Camping outside in a hammock. Oh, wait, I've been reminded of addendums. Yeah, I have a few other little things I didn't mention. Just a couple ultra short stories that are sticking out in my mind that I forgot to put in earlier. I was walking down the road, videotaping just the natural splendor of the Irish countryside, which is as nice as you imagine. Rolling hills and broad fields, cobblestone walls lining, and I suddenly realized I had just walked by a horse just a few feet away who had, similar to my monster nightmare horses, stuck his head as far over the top of the wall as he could and just stared at me silently. And I went back and said hello, but I didn't go too close because I always think horses are going to bite me. A nice thing that happened, I was walking and it started to rain, and it continued to rain, and just continued to rain, but I checked my map and I still had hour and a half of walking or something before I'd get to the next building. A lot of the countryside is very dotted with towns, very far spread apart. But I really don't mind the rain, and I knew I'd get to a pub, and then I'd have my Guinness and crisps, and it would be warm inside. I could heat up and dry out. But, it's not super comfortable when it just keeps raining, and I had already been walking in the rain for like 20 minutes when these guys pulled up and asked if I wanted a ride to the next town. And I can't actually remember now if they were local or tourists, but I believe they were tourists as well from somewhere in Eastern Europe. But I'm not exactly sure, but that's sticking out in my mind for some reason. I mean, that they were from Eastern Europe. Obviously, it sticks out in my mind that two people were kind enough to give me a ride to the next town. So I got there, an hour, 15 minutes early, and had a Guinness and a packet of crisps and dried out and warmed up, and then walked back out into the less pouring rain that night. It was funny, the whole time I was backpacking for those couple of weeks through Ireland, I just got rained on, even when I was sleeping. And except for that one night where I was absolutely drenched, the quick dry hammock really did absorb and wick away and evaporate moisture as quickly as it slowly drizzle rained. So it really wasn't that bad. I didn't get soaked except for that one time, and then this time when I got the ride. And most of it was just pleasant walking weather. But thanks, hitchhiker-friendly tourist fellows. After that super cold and completely soaked night where I had to walk down the middle of the road drying everything, I only had those few hours of sleep in front of that family's house before I had to start walking. And I went to a pub, dried up, like I said. And then I was just trying to find any place to sleep, but there were no public lands. Everything was posted private property for miles until I finally came across this one section that on my map was marked as public land, and I found a little sign that said they were hunting grounds. And I was like, well, I'm not gonna sleep in hunting lands. And I walked by it, and then after a minute I was like, well, why not? It's the middle of winter. It's not hunting season, I don't think so. And it's freezing and raining, so nobody's going to be hunting here anyway. And I didn't see a soul around. There were no cars. And this was far away from anything. So if you were hunting here, you either had to live at one of the farms directly next door. But even then, the entrance would be like 2 miles away. You'd probably still drive your car to the area. So I didn't think anyone was in there, and I didn't go into the hunting lands. I just stayed right next to the entry wall, put up my hammock, and I was like, I'll just rest here and I just clonked out. Like, I was unconscious immediately because I was so exhausted. And I woke up to, like, a sound, and I looked over, and there was a gaggle of... I can see through the sheer fabric of the ultralight quick-dry hammock, and I could see, like, there was a few what looked like teenagers looking over the wall and wondering, like, what the heck is that? And you could tell from their voices, they were like, what is hanging there? What is that? And then I popped my head up, and I was like, hey. And they were like, oh, hi. And then kept walking away. And I found out I had been sleeping for 3 hours or so, up until the early afternoon. But that recharged me. I felt way better after my few hours of extra rest. And every time after that, it was pretty easy to find public land or trees out of the way that I could put up my hammock in. But it was just, I think it was like 10 a.m. when I fell asleep or something like that in those hunting lands. And I was just so exhausted from being soaked to the bone and having to walk holding my clothes so that they would dry, and my sleeping bag and my hammock. And then sleeping in that guy's front yard and being woken up at 7 a.m., 8 a.m., whatever it was, when he left for work. And then I was like, well, I can't stay in front of their house all day. And I kept walking. So when I found that public hunting lands, even though that seems like a pretty bad place to sleep, it seemed completely empty at the time. And I just, like I said, just totally passed out unconscious. I wrote down Carlow, not Waterford. So I'm not sure if Carlow was where I met the rugby team. It may have been, but I thought it was in Waterford. But there's no way I could remember. I think it was Waterford. I'm not sure why I wrote down Carlow, but that was one of the other towns I walked through, it seems like, because it's on the way down to Waterford. And then I took a bus to Cork from Waterford, which I had completely forgot about, that I actually did get to Cork, which is in the other Irish non-hammock camping episode. So you can check that out for all the stuff I did, while a lot of urban camping around Ireland, which is hammock camping but around the city areas instead of in the rural countryside. Thank you so much for listening. I loved this experience. I love telling this story. I'm excited to tell the other stories soon, and I'll talk to you in a few days.